Hey friends, so just a quick note before this episode. We had a ton of fun with this one, but our recording equipment and more specifically the internet I had at the time was just not good. So there are a couple of places where the audio gets a little bit weird, and a kind of notable weird cut at the end where it just didn't record like 10 seconds of audio. I don't know what happened there. We'll try and do better in the future. These things happen, unfortunately, but I hope that you can look past it and enjoy it anyway, because, again, we did have a good time with this one. All right, I'll shut up and leave you to enjoy. Hi, welcome to Hey, Look at My Thing with Aaron Irons, Keegan Reynolds, Rachel Bennett, and this week, special guest Alex Rinehart. On this podcast, we share things we're enthusiastic about with our friends, and this week, Alex will be sharing John Dies at the End.
And let's welcome our guest, Alex.
Oh, cool.
He had to do something. We're not going to ask what, because we don't want to know.
It might have been petting his very cute dog. Let's just put that in our brains, and we'll roll with that.
I'm back now. Don't worry.
Great. What type of media are we consuming with John Dies at the End? Tell us a little bit about it, because there's options.
So the first way that I encountered John Dies at the End was reading Cracked.com, if anyone remembers that, back when it was a thing. If you don't remember Cracked.com, it was basically a bunch of listicles of top 10 articles that were very funny and usually rather crude. It's gone downhill. I think it's still around, but it's not good anymore. Gotcha. The John Dies at the End is written by one of the former editors of Cracked.com. So he posted excerpts there on that website as free advertising. As for like what kind of media it is, it's a book that I like to describe as Ghostbusters with dick jokes.
Oh, that's right up my alley.
Or I guess it's more appropriate to say Ghostbusters with more dick jokes.
Okay.
That's fair.
But it's a really weird genre of horror comedy, which you don't get a lot of.
I would argue not enough of as a general rule.
I mean, you've got some Evil Dead. You've got the one with the guy from Firefly.
Tucker and Dale vs. Evil.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the one.
That's only two I can think of, like, right off the top of my head.
There's way more than that, Keegan, for what it's worth.
Like, what about Elvira?
Yeah,
I don't watch a lot of horror or read a lot of horror, but I guess there's some supernatural comedy that I've read. There's a book series about a vampire accountant who's pretty funny, but it's horror. Well, I mean, I don't know. It's kind of horror.
I'm taking this to mean, Keegan, that you know literally nothing about John Dies at the End. Your previous experience is zero.
I know they made a movie out of it, I think.
They did.
It
was on Netflix for a while. It was extremely faithful to the book and yet had very little of its charm.
Well,
somehow,
I mean,
yes.
Yeah. You do the best you can.
It did. I mean, we could have a separate Rachel's Art Corner about it, though, because it did do some really stunning, cool things visually. But we're not talking about the movie. That's important. We're talking about the book. How about you, Aaron? Do you have previous experience with this particular media?
I'm going to shock everybody this week and tell you that I know absolutely nothing about this topic.
Cool. Yeah. No, that's personal. Thank you so much.
Do you know anything about comedy, horror, and or Cracked.com?
No. Again, no.
Aaron in his pretty shell.
You took the time to like plumb the depths of your mind. Like, how much do I really know about? And then it came up with a complete null, just nothing at all.
Perfect.
I am sort of in a weird spot on this one because I have both seen the film and once, many a moon ago, read this book. It's been forever. I think I read it when I was in high school, so like over a decade at least. because it might have been college. But yeah, it's been a long time. So I'm excited to jump back in. Alex, is there anything else that we should like know or be aware of, or a mindset that we should have as we dive into exploring this piece of media?
Honestly, reading it when you're in high school is a really good idea for the tone.
Mm-hmm.
So just embrace that tone for a minute.
That makes me think of
to your high school self. Keegan,
oh God.
Back to the place where you were when you were a high schooler, just really in the depths of being miserable and confused and weirdly horny about things that didn't make sense. That's probably a part of the experience, I think. All that should roll right in.
It just makes me think when you say that, like that mindset. When I was in 7th grade, I watched the second Kevin Smith movie, Mallrats.
I was going to mention Mallrats as a perfect movie to watch when you're in high school and never again.
Yeah, well, it was actually to a 7th grader who kind of loved that kind of humor, like specifically right then, it was 100% perfect for me. I had to watch it twice because I was laughing too hard to understand the lines of plot. Like I had to rewatch it to because I missed so much because I could not stop laughing. Now I know as old Keegan, it's not that funny of a movie. I enjoy it, but it's not laughing so hard you can't breathe funny. It is not that funny, but it was the absolute perfect time in my life to watch that movie.
Yes, and John Dies at the End is similar, although I think that it does hold up a little better than Mallrats.
Well, I mean, most things do.
That's true.
I do not. You said I was laughing too hard to recognize the plot in that movie, and I went into a death spiral. Like, that movie has a plot? Is there a plot in that movie?
There is a revenge film at its core.
They want to stop a game show from happening.
Really?
Well, and they want to get back at the dude, the poop hand guy who has sex with the people in the back of the Volkswagen. Well, not in the back of the Volkswagen.
Well, okay, right. So there was just two different things. Okay, one, the poop hand guy is a different person than the one that has sex in the back of Volkswagens with people.
It's been a long time since
Ben Affleck is famous in this movie for trying to have anal sex with people.
Right.
And the poop hand guy is one of the main character's girlfriend's father who is trying to break him and the girlfriend up, and then they poop hand him.
Aaron, the face you're making right now speaks volumes.
The thing that was better than the plot was watching Aaron's face become slowly more and more horrified. What the fuck, friends?
I don't remember any of this.
Yeah, no.
Did you watch Mallrats?
Passingly. It might have been on. Do I watch anything?
Yeah, it's true.
Way too cool, way too woke, way too erudite to enjoy poop hands type humor when he was in high school. He had his shit figured out and understood the world.
All right, I guess we should probably jump into reading now that we're done with the whole poop hand conversation.
Yes, right. Let's jump into John Dies at the End. I'll see you on the other side.
Thank you so much for saying the thing. Hey friends, it's me again with your friendly neighborhood ad break. So this week we had Alex on to join us, and we're super appreciative that he was willing to come on the show and share John Dies at the End with us. We had a really good time with it. And I know Aaron actually has continued reading it, so we'll check back in on that in the future. Well, spoiler for an upcoming episode. But Alex works as a programmer. He writes code. And one of the things that he shared with me that he was passionate about is this program called Girls Who Code. You can go to girlswhocode.com to learn a little bit more about them. But they do some super rad shit. So their whole purpose, their mission, is to sort of close the gender gap that exists in technology and programming and kind of change the image of what programming looks like. Working in schools, I see all the time that a lot of people think, well, this isn't a field that's open to me because they don't see people who look like them in that field, right? We see it for basically everyone who's not a white dude in basically every field, where a lot of the examples that we get of people who are exemplars in that field come historically from a very, very small subset of the population that is not particularly representative of all the people who could be great there. And Girls Who Code is looking to change that. So they do programming in clubs and summer camps for 3rd through 12th grade. They work on internships and scholarships and get into a whole bunch of really cool stuff working with like colleges and alumni to help build community with women in tech. So this is a great way to sort of move tech forward and get new minds and different perspectives thinking about what our world could be and how we can make it that way. So again, that's girlswhocode.com if you want to throw a little extra money their way. In the meantime, we'll see you next time, and we love you. Bye, friends. So we're back. We read the first 3 chapters, is that right? Of John Dies at the End, or at the very least, the first 2 chapters of John Dies at the End. I'm actually honestly not sure what chapter mark it stopped at. So tell us, what did we see or experience? I guess.
All right. So we started with a prologue where they jump into the action, and I think it does a really good job of just like hitting you really hard with something interesting. So the story revolves around these 2 guys, John and David. They have a dog, Molly, and they are approached by a girl who's crying and says, "Hey, my boyfriend's abusing me. I heard you 2 can help me. Oh, by the way, he's a ghost." Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a shocking twist. Let's drive her back to her house where we see if we can find this ghost boyfriend. She convinces them to go into the basement where they go down there and find a freezer full of meat with a deer tongue. But otherwise, it's not that interesting. There's not a lot to see, no ghosty boys. And so they go back upstairs and are like, "Hey, girl, there's no ghost boy here. What's going on? And what'd you say your name is again?" And she's like, "Oh, it's Morris." And they're like, "Well, the house name says Morrison, so that's a little weird, not adding up." And all of a sudden, she dissolves into a bunch of snakes. The dog who was sitting with her jumps up and runs upstairs, and the door shuts, and they're locked in the basement, which the door handle turns into a penis. And they say, "Well, we can't open this door because it's a penis." I'm going to come back to that because
I also want to come back to that.
The entire basement floods with shit, and they think, well, we could either sit here in the shit, we could grab a hold of that door handle penis, which we absolutely will not do, and let's squeeze through a vent to get back upstairs. So that's what they do. They vandalize this house that they're in order to squeeze through a vent because they're too homophobic to touch a penis door handle. Whatever. The story moves forward. They're in the house and they try and play their vulnerable and do things that make them vulnerable so this ghost will come out after them. It eventually does in the form of meat. So the freezer full of meat becomes a ghost monster man who's 7 foot tall, grabs a hold of David by the neck and pins him there. The dog comes around and bites into the meat, more so because she's hungry than to defend him, and allows the monster to let go of him. He runs to find John, who's got a boombox and plays
Whitesnake, right?
Here I Go Again by Whitesnake, which is music of the gods apparently, and will drive away the demon. It almost works, but the demon flails about and destroys the boombox and then is like, "I'm gonna get you guys back for what you did to me, Mr. Magician Man, who is not the 2 people who are in front of me." And they're like, whoa, wait a minute. You've got beef with somebody, Mr. Ghost, and that beef is not us. So let me go ahead and make a few phone calls, which, whatever, we'll use some willing suspension of disbelief that they can get a hold of this guy at 5 a.m. or whatever, calling his office, but whatever, I'm not here. So they get a hold of this guy. They get him on the phone. They say, "Here's your man, Mr. Ghost." And then the ghost erupts into blue flame or something and just evaporates. And the guy doesn't even say like hi to them. He just hangs up and gives them his secretary, and that's essentially the end of the exorcism that they somehow performed. So that was kind of the hook of the story, which was interesting and fun and weird. It goes to an interview where he's talking to a reporter who kind of is skeptical, doesn't believe anything that he's saying. And then he busts out these superpowers like, I can kind of read your mind and your dreams. I can see things that aren't there by telling you how much change you have in your pocket. I have some special abilities. This is David, by the way, who's talking to the interviewer. John is a part of this story in a big way, but the lens that this is told through is by David. So that's essentially all that happens in the interview. Is he's going to tell a story about the things that he sees or the special powers he has. It's like his side of the story, but it doesn't really go into great detail. And it segues into chapter 1, where it's how did this all begin? And chapter 1 is the before time, where they are in their early 20s. They're graduated from high school, as I believe. Yes. I think that's true because they're both working jobs, but they are quintessential slackers. They've got a band that performs at this party, and Dave, he's in the band, but he can't play or sing. So he's literally just a gag for their opening bit. Like, David is so untalented and useless that I have no words for him, but whatever. We'll move on. So he does a shtick where he's going to open up the band. He dies in front of everybody, supposedly, and then John comes out of the audience and starts playing. So David can go do his thing. So he goes off and tries to hit on some girls, or very unsuccessfully. He runs into this magician called Robert, who has a fake Jamaican accent and like a Rastafarian hat, and he does his magic tricks. And David goes up to him and is like, "Ooh, spooky dude, whatever," like, and just really hateful. And Robert says, "Hey, I can read your mind and your dreams. And by the way, you had a really weird, messed up dream. And in front of everybody, I'm going to reveal that to you." And he's like, "This isn't real. I don't believe you." And David runs off and finds a dog named Molly, who belongs to somebody else, but he doesn't return the dog to that address. He just kind of keeps it, sort of. The dog makes it clear that the dog wants to spend time with David, so I guess it's okay. The party ends, and John is going on and on about how cool Robert is, and all these other friends are going to go hang out with him. And Dave, being a sulky, sad little son of a bitch, is like, "No, I'm going to go see this girl making out with this guy and be real sad about it." And anyway, fast forward, I think it's the next day is chapter 2, but it's definitely follows like quick succession. John had been hanging out with Robert and them. And Dave goes and falls asleep on his own, real sad. He's got his dog with him, which isn't his dog, whatever. He gets a phone call from John. John is like, "I don't know what time it is or if I've called you 7,000 times or 2, but come over." And he's like, "Okay, it's like 5 a.m, bro, and we have to go to work soon, but I guess." So he gets his dog and goes driving over there and gets another call where he's like, "No, don't come over. Go to Las Vegas." And it's all spoopy. He gets there and he gets tackled by John, who says there's demons. He's really not buying it. David is like, "I've had enough of your shit. Let's go to the hospital." He finds a syringe that has this black gooey liquid in it, and he pockets it without putting a cap on or anything. So there's already like this Chekhov's gun sitting in a sweatshirt, but whatever. We'll save that for 2 minutes when I get to it. They go to Denny's. John is acting crazy. He gets a cell phone call from John while he's sitting with John, and he's like, "Oh, you're coming to pick me up, whatever." And it's like all spoopy, and he doesn't believe it, but he's like, "Okay, let's go to work." So they're driving to work, and they go to this guy's house, which I didn't mention yet, but it kind of came up and was foreshadowed at the party. This redhead guy who has a younger sister who's in special education, he calls Cucumber for very terrible reasons, and I'm not going to get into it, but we probably will later. She answers the door and said her brother's dead, probably, but the dog is hers, maybe, but you can have it because it was $125 and it bit somebody who's bit Robert, actually. So we're tying things together somehow, maybe. So Robert's drugs are still in his pocket as he goes to work at a movie rental store. So this is like 2005 or some shit. Because I've got cell phones and movie rental stores. So there's like a very small window of time that these two things were together.
Of the Venn diagram of time and space.
So they arrive at their Blockbuster knockoff, and he props up John in front of a computer because he's like totally spaced out on drugs. And he sits down, and I don't know exactly how this happens. He gets on a phone call with a priest, and then he jams accidentally the syringe into his body, which then injects him with this goo. And then he starts seeing things, and I think the FBI get involved. This is where I was like at the end of my attention span, because I was at the end of chapter 2 and I like, there's a whole nother chapter and I need to think about what all just happened because I don't really get it all. So that's where I ended, is where like we kind of saw the introduction of where they get their powers from. We've seen at least how they kind of manifest into demon fighting stuff. And we've gotten this introduction of how this all comes to be. If it's important, you guys can come in and talk me through chapter 3, but I saw none of that.
Go ahead, Alex.
I just want to mention you skipped over the Nazi.
Right. The Nazi. So there was a Nazi guy that he like fought in his dream. Is that what happened?
I believe at the very beginning he said basically he was describing a Nazi he killed with an axe, and then he broke the axe, so he had to buy a new axe,
yes.
and then he had to kill the Nazi again with the new axe. And is it the same axe? It's a philosophical question.
It's the ship of Theseus, right? Is that
the Nazi axe of Theseus?
Yes,
I will admit,
axe of Theseus.
This book opened up a lot like Naked Lunch, where I could not follow it, and I had like no concept of what was going on, and so it took me a good page to even understand I was in this book and where we were. So once they got to some plot, that's when I finally like checked in, and I do remember that part of the book, but it was like gone until you mentioned it. It was like a dream to me.
That feels really fair to me, that like we actually, Alex and I just discussed not too long ago Naked Lunch and our inability to read it because of the way that it is and the things that it does. But I get sort of like disconnectedness where it's really more about the like images that you're getting than any particular like through line. That is definitely a big part of this book overall in general, but especially at the beginning.
Rachel, did you want to tell us about chapter 3?
Yeah, I can touch really briefly on chapter 3. So the sort of biggest parts of chapter 3 are that David is taken in for interrogation by the local police department. There's these 2 police officers, and he thinks of them as acting as like good cop, bad cop, but he only really interacts with the one police officer, who he immediately labels as Morgan Freeman, even though he says he really doesn't look like Morgan Freeman. It's like a different actor he's thinking of, but he can't remember the name, which I actually think is very charming and cute, because it's a very human moment where the author could have just like figured out the right one and chose not to as a part of David's character. Regardless, this guy interrogates him, and he learns that the people who were at the party where his band was playing, who went off with the Jamaican, all of them are either in critical condition or dead or disappeared from that night before, except for John. And this detective is asking a bunch of questions, and he uses this as kind of an opportunity to describe the effects of this drug, the soy sauce, if you will, kicking in. So he explains kind of how it works. We saw him like read on the reporter Arnie, like, oh, this is the change you have in your pocket and the dates. And this is the weird dream you had last night about your mom chasing you down with a whip made of penises or whatever it is. There's a lot of penises in this book.
Yeah, a lot of penises.
Horror and disdain. Yeah, we're coming back to it. And he talks through that it like doesn't allow him to read minds, but it gives him like crazy insight into the sort of like micro expressions that we read all the time, which again, Aaron, I think comes back to that willing suspension of disbelief, right? Because there is no amount of micro expression that can reveal the dates on the change in my pocket, right? Or what heads and tails are going to flip. So either he doesn't really understand or we are supposed to just take this as read. But that is the way that he kind of describes what is happening to him. And toward the end, the police officer that he's been interacting with gets called out of the room, and the other one who's been in the room is still silent. He gets a call from John on his cell phone, who asks if he's died yet, and that is what pulled the other police officer out of the room. As they were like, "Oh, John's dead. We have like ambulances coming. Our guys performing CPR on him, but John's dead." So John calls and he's like, "Yo, if I died, cool. You need to stay away from the other police officer in the room. Don't look at him directly. Just get out of the room. Nobody's going to stop you. It'll be fine. Just don't make eye contact with him." And David, being David in all the ways that he is, whips his head up into the two-way mirror or the one-way mirror that's in the interrogation room and sees that this police officer is not reflected in it, that he hasn't actually been there. And then he like also transforms into a monster. His like mustache comes off and starts attacking David's head, and then he like grabs onto David's face with his arm. David like kicks him in the shin basically, and he like falls to the ground, but his arm stays stuck. He looks down and he's like, "Well, that can't have happened. Oh, it's because his arm ripped off and it's just like clamped onto my face. Cool, rad." He dips because that's terrible, and ends up going back to the drug dealer, the faux Jamaican guy's trailer, where he sees some weirdness. He's like made this really hauntingly beautiful and in-depth sort of like trompe l'oeil painting, right? Where everything looks so realistic that you could like walk into it, except the more he looks at it, the more horrifying it is, and he decides to leave. There's a like secret passage through the trailer into like an underground area, which he thinks might have been an old well. And we sort of like leave him as he is lowering himself into this underground passage. Like, yeah, this definitely isn't going to kill me. It's fine. There's a part in there that's pretty funny where the cell phone that he's talking to John on as John is giving him directions is dying. And so John tells him to buy a bratwurst, and then he talks to John through the bratwurst instead. So we're given to believe that the connection has nothing to do with the phone and is more of a psychic link. And the idea of him walking down the street holding up a bratwurst to his head like a cell phone and talking into it is a really golden, very good image, and probably one of the best parts of this particular section. Yeah, I think that's most of what we get. We get a little bit of sort of like what he and John were like in high school, which was something that stuck out to me is his description of if you asked anybody who knew him in high school, nobody would be surprised if you said that John was involved with the end of the world. They'd be like, yeah, obviously, which feels like it fits with his character. I think that's it. I think that's all of it.
Okay.
Dig us in, you've got shit. I can tell from the look on your face. And also one of my notes from this was that I flipped back to you making the most like disgusted, incredulous face on camera because it was still up while you were reading. And you were looking down at your reading section with just like horror and despair.
I really like the kind of horror genre that doesn't take itself seriously. I think it's really well written in a way that makes it campy and fun. But that said, I hate David. I cannot stand David as a character. There's a couple redeeming qualities, but everything about him just annoys the ever-living shit out of me.
I only found the only one laudable thing that I think I can say about him is when his friend called him for help, he like remembered a time when his friend had to go to the hospital and like hadn't done so, and he had like told his friend, if you're in trouble, call me and I'll help you, because if you don't, I'll have to beat you up and kill you.
Yeah.
That's him at his best.
He also does immediately, upon seeing the lost dog, think, I've got to get this lost dog back to its owner. Now, he doesn't commit to that. And actually,
No, he does not follow through. There is no follow through. He has zero follow through.
No, gosh.
He himself as like recognizing the correct action to have taken 2 hours after he should have taken it. Which I think is a perfect encapsulation of his character in a lot of ways. I don't know. I found him a little bit endearing because he's such like an ineffectual piece of shit. But I don't think that he's like cruel. I don't think that he's like unkind. You know, he doesn't have anything about him where I'm like, oh, I hate this in a person, right? It's just that he's like, he's the kind of person that's frustrating to have to live with.
He's a very relatable character that I, in 0% possible way, relate to. Like, I know so many people like him, and they're people I don't want to hang out with or want to be around.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's what rubs me the most wrong about him, is just like, I've had so many friends that I've had to essentially cut off because they're not accountable, and they're just not fully there for you. They're kind of wrapped up in their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
not the kind of people you'd want to do superpowered drugs with.
Yeah, no. Well, but they're the types of people who just can't help themselves but do superpowered drugs.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the
Venn diagram.
Yeah, the way he talks about other people, women especially, and the way he's obviously homophobic and maybe a little bit racist. I don't know.
Can we go back to the door dick?
Literally,
yeah.
As I was reading through, is just open the penis door, you fucking coward. That is a direct quote
exactly.
As I was reading.
I will say that this door cannot be opened is a really funny moment and a great quote.
It's a funny moment. It's a great quote, but also like just fucking put the dick in your hand and just fucking open it, you fucking coward.
Yeah.
Now, in his defense, is it clear that grabbing the dick and twisting would open the door?
No, but like you're gonna not even try?
Yeah.
That's a fair point.
I don't know. I think that was like the clearest. So I think a lot about audience, right? Like, who is this book intended for? And it's not me. 100%.
No.
It is super not the person that I am. But that is like the clearest indicator that we got in this section. There were two, actually. It's that scene and the scene where he's on the drugs in the interview, and he's thinking about the names that they chose and how the reason that he chose David Wong and the reason that John chose John is because they're the most popular names, right? That statistically there's more of those than anything else. And he like starts visualizing all of the people in the world, and instead is like, I'm gonna think about the waitress's boobs. Like,
yeah.
Okay, the audience for this book is a 15 to 22-year-old straight white male, and I am none of those things. So like, I'm not the preferred audience for this particular novel.
I think you're one of those things.
I'm one of those things. That's true.
So like right at the beginning when he like has his little philosophy moment at the beginning, it just feels like, I don't know, like it's not really philosophy. It's him pretending to be clever and having a philosophy moment. It's like he's not that deep. Yeah, it's like David's not that deep. He's just not. Like the 2000s, the knots or whatever, that was obviously just oozing through like every page.
Yes,
and it seemed to me. there was a lot of things that didn't make sense plot wise, but it was okay because everything's weird for weird's sake. And I don't know, like I tried to watch like a couple different like anime or other TV shows where at least the protagonist was this kind of sad, pathetic person, and it's really hard for me because like, man, I just do not care. It's like, oh, he's gonna have a redeeming, or it's like, I don't know if I really care if he gets redeemed.
That's so fucking cold.
Wow.
I want to talk a little bit about the things that I did actually really like, because things that I liked. I actually really loved the intro. I think that the first effectively page of this is kind of a masterclass in setting tone, right? You don't get through the introduction with the acts without knowing pretty much exactly what you're getting into. And it does a pretty accurate job of setting up the book as a whole. It's got an amazing hook. Like it is clear immediately that you're going to get dark humor. It's going to be surreal. You're definitely going to get horror elements. You're definitely going to be having a weird time and be made to feel uncomfortable. And that is part of the purpose, I think, and the intro sets that up beautifully. The other thing that he does is he's really, really good with visualization and imagery. The scene, they talk a little bit about this like guy that it's revealed later that they helped out, David and John, who was this like really good lawyer and then basically had kind of like a break or a moment and was driving his car and felt like a weird sensation in his legs and turned on the dome light and there were these like big crunchy horrible spiders or whatever all over his legs. And the thing that he does that's really cool and very delicate is he gives you just enough to create a really concrete image in your mind as you're like visualizing what's happening, but not so much that you have to remember to work in specific details. Like he's not going to waste the time describing every single like color and the action of the movement and things like that, because that's too much for you to put in your brain at one time. He leaves enough space for you to work from your own experience and puts enough in to make sure that you know this isn't your own experience, though. This is something different and more unsettling than your own experience.
I would agree with that.
I think the most apt description that I got out of this, the one that I related to the most, was his description of a Midwest town that has 4 McDonald's and taxis that you have to call in order to get. You can't just go and wave them down. And then the wildly changing weather from 108 degrees to negative 18. It was just like, oh my God, he could be describing Cedar Rapids.
He said it was nearer to Kentucky. I'm like, okay, so it's not quite us, but it's pretty close.
There's actually 3 books in this series. And one thing that I always do when I read a book that intentionally doesn't give a location is I try to figure out where it could be.
That's cool.
And over the course of this series, it becomes pretty clear that it's probably Indianapolis. Or sorry, not Indianapolis, but Indiana.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would have expected that.
It could be Missouri, but it's a little further from Kentucky than you'd hope.
Yeah.
But they have Waffle Houses, so it can't be Iowa.
That's true.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a Waffle House in what we just read, but they do come later.
Indiana.
No, they have a Denny's, but not a Waffle House.
It's fair. Like Indiana and Iowa in a lot of ways are kind of cut from the same cloth, like feeling like those are pretty similar. Honestly, I thought Kansas, because he talks about being right in the middle of Tornado Alley and how every now and then tornadoes will just materialize and wreck everybody's entire shit. So my first thought was Kansas, which again also feels an awful lot like Iowa.
We didn't get too much of it in this book. In this few chapters, but for anyone who read Cracked.com, Cracked focused a lot on like 10 things you didn't know about the Beastie Boys, where it was kind of like a pre-BuzzFeed, but with a lot more juvenile humor. And like the further on this series goes, the more you get the impression that the author wants to be writing cracked articles. And you get scenarios that are set up just so the author can say, oh, ho, ho, did you know that back in the 80s, Japan had a policy of da-da-da-da-da? Or like they introduced the Waffle House Index of like, FEMA tells how bad a hurricane is by how many Waffle Houses are closed. And like they set up these scenarios that are fabricated just to show off this one piece of knowledge that it feels like this person was browsing Wikipedia, found something interesting, and then wrote it into their book.
Okay, yeah.
And it's a little unfair of praise, but I appreciate that didn't happen in this first chapter.
That wasn't your first impression.
Well, like that's interesting because like during Halloween, me and my wife watched the Hubie Halloween with Adam Sandler. I don't know if either of you guys saw that on Netflix.
God, no. Keegan, you know my sisters know. Why do you ask me these things? You know I have to.
Well, just the reason I bring it up is because it felt like it had like 20 different writers who all did that. They found something interesting that they wanted to put into this movie, and they wrote a scene so they could have that interesting thing happen, but none of them were really related to each other, and they just all jammed them together into a movie. And I don't know. It seems like a bad way to make a plot.
That's a fair and actually really insightful critique, Keegan. If you came to me and you were like, Rachel, I have the secret of this book. It was actually written by 6 different people who all worked at Crack together and they wrote it on their lunch breaks and just like exquisite corpsed it and passed it from person to person, I'd go, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to spoil too much about the rest of this book in case anyone does go on to finish it. But there are a lot of things in here that get tied up in a really, really pleasant way.
Yes.
Where things that seem like one-off lines, not like the dick in the door, but things that seem like one-off lines really come back. Or a lot of the things where it's like, oh, this is just a random side effect, get explained in a way where you say, wow, this was planned.
There's already some payoff.
Yeah, it's already happening a little bit. There's the like syringe in his jacket comes back, obviously. But I guess we didn't. The dog comes back too.
The address on the dog's tag is how he was found out how to return it. So those are like little breadcrumbs of payoff. But I assume there's probably much bigger moments.
There's a lot bigger things where it's like he'll have a hallucination that seems random, and then 40 pages later, it's like, oh, if he hadn't had that hallucination, this wouldn't have worked out the exact right way.
Right. So he's got to have a cat of 9 tails made of penises in order to vanquish the next ghost.
Well, and like I said, it's not everything. If there's a penis involved, it's usually irrelevant.
I just don't understand. So thinking about audience, right? Again, I assume that's like to make the dudes that this book is definitely like intending as its audience uncomfortable. Is that like is this like a body horror thing? Is that what's supposed to be happening?
I mean, I think there's a mix of like, A, it's funny. Like, oh yeah, that's a dick. Haha, look at that wee-wee. It's funny.
It wasn't
but
funny
also
when
like
you said wee-wee, so thank you for that.
Yeah. I was trying to think of the funniest term I could use, and I was between willy and wee-wee.
I think wee-wee is it. I think you nailed it.
Yeah, thank you. Nailed that wee-wee. I think it is really uncomfortable to like visualize being slapped by a succession of penises on a rope.
To you.
That's not
You're right. I'm not trying to shame. That's not something I want to imagine, and I can't stop imagining right now.
I never felt, I assume Aaron's in the boat with me. I never felt like what I think is supposed to be the appropriate amount of like squicked out by the like doorknob penis. Like that's like, okay, cool. Just it doesn't matter. Just put your hand on it, see if it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And then like also this door cannot be opened. You just shouldered through the door. Like, just kick it down. You don't have to.
Yeah. I mean, how hard can a dick be to like?
Well.
I mean, I believe that the penis was flaccid. I believe that it was a large flaccid penis.
It was.
So even more ammunition against David.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I just the dick humor I think is supposed to be funny and also terrifying, and I did not get terror from dicks. I'm just not as about my dick as some people might be.
The door scene I think is very funny. To me, that still holds up. Of just imagining these characters who at this point are well defined, and just seeing that he would have to grab this dick and saying it can't be done. There's nothing for it. We have to crawl through the vents.
I also appreciate the fact that, like, okay, so on first blush, right, that seems sort of problematic, which is why to both Aaron and I, we were like, wait, no. Like, as if we needed more evidence that David's kind of a piece of shit, right? Like, it does give something to his character where it's like, really, you can't like nut up enough for this one thing. Like, okay, all right. If that's the kind of life you're leading, if you're that insecure, I guess, whatever. But it does do something to define his character, that instead of like going for what could be this really easy route in the situation where they're like about to be drowning in actual feces, he's like, nope, not worth it to me. If this is how I go out, I guess that's it. Like,
this door cannot be opened.
Cannot be.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I think I could read this and enjoy it. It had its funny parts, it had interesting parts, but it also just feels really meandering. It doesn't feel to me, I don't know, like, I know they jumped right into action, but he seems to take breaks from that action to kind of like tell us how shitty he is every 5 minutes. I'm like after a while, I'm like, yeah, man, no, I get it. Like, you're a bad person who is pathetic and sad and dumb and shitty. Like, now we can just get on with the actual story.
Yeah. I do think the ghost stuff was way more interesting than the backstory, but I understand that we have to kind of understand where they got these powers from. And it sounded like I missed more in chapter 3 that would have been interesting to me had I powered through.
If the development of their powers is something that you're interested in seeing more of, they definitely dig into like how exactly that comes about more, because obviously this is like an important part of what it is that they're doing. And if you like the ghost fighting stuff, like there's for sure a lot of that too. Like, we get a whole nother ghost fight in chapter 3, and I think, Alex, you've probably reread this more recently than I have, I would assume. But there's definitely a lot more spooks and scares around the corner.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely, like, there's a reason I described it as dick busters, as Ghostbusters with dick jokes.
Nope, it is Dick Busters. I just want to hear the theme song now.
Nope.
They are afraid of the dick.
They are. They're afraid of that dick.
No, they definitely gets into like them becoming amateur ghost fighters or amateur exorcists as the story goes on. But it's a personal story. It's not just like, we're going to fight ghosts because that's the right thing to do. It's like, this particular ghost pissed me off and I want to do something about it.
Even less laudable. Cool.
Yep. That sounds
no, they're not good motivation. People. I want to be clear.
They're bad people.
So, they made a movie out of this for not theater, or was it in theater?
I think it was straight to Netflix.
No. I don't think so.
I mean, straight to DVD, but no one bought the DVD.
I feel like it went to theaters.
Really?
Yeah, doesn't that seem like a mistake?
All right, 2012. Yeah. It came out in 2012. Opening day in the U.S. So it had a real actual thing.
It was a whole thing.
I had no idea, and like, I was the target. Like, I liked this, but I read this book when it came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had no idea. The book only came out in 2011, I think. 2011, 2012.
So he must have
written in 2007, though.
Yeah, but he didn't release it because he wrote it over many years.
Yeah.
He must have known. Like, he must have had this, like, film thing lined up or been, like, working on the screenplay as he published the book. Because...
Right.
Like, otherwise, I don't see how it could be that quick a turnaround. And the film, wasn't terrible.
They dragged poor Paul Giamatti into this? Oh, man.
Yeah.
I do like Clancy Brown as the doctor they got on the phone to get rid of that original demon. That seems like it kind of works for me.
And honestly, Paul Giamatti as the reporter, the like interviewer, is extremely good. Like, incredibly good. It's really not a bad movie. It does definitely lose something in translation where I think it... I don't know. Is it that it tries to take itself too seriously? Is it that it like tries not to have the character?
The main villain. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Ignore me.
I think they try to redeem John and David a little bit too much in the film. Where like the point of the story is that these boys suck. They're the fucking worst. They're really just pretty dreadful in a lot of ways. And they have redeeming qualities about them, but not any that actually make them not pieces of shit. And I think they try too hard to make them seem reasonable or make them seem like more well-adjusted or palatable because it's to a wider audience. And so it loses something, I think, in that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. I didn't think it was. I didn't think it was the worst book I've ever read. I could probably finish it. I didn't want to like stop, but it definitely like it definitely is not for a 36-year-old Keegan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say there are certain parts of this that I can identify being that age and feeling, but it just like there's a lot of it that's really foreign to me. Like the straight white male kind of mentality where I'm just like, I don't know what that's like. You tell me.
You've never imagined the waitress's boobs to stop yourself from like running through every human on the planet?
At one point I tried really hard to think that way, but that just didn't work out.
Just think of boobs. Just think of boobs.
Cool. I'm gonna make that. Can I get that one more time? Just a clean one, Keegan, for like a ringtone.
Yeah. Just think of boobs.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much. That's beautiful.
No problem.
So I think that's most of our reactions. Does anyone have anything else that they want to get in before we wrap things up?
I think we covered the most of it.
I think that's about everything.
You got all my notes.
Alex, you're making a cheeky face. Any final thoughts?
I have nothing to add. I think we've covered it.
Great.
Well, Alex, thank you very much for sharing this with us.
Yeah.
Thank you for reading it.
We appreciate you.
And thank you so much for coming on as well.
Yes. Hey, who do we have next time? Do we know? Who's up?
I think it's probably me.
I think it is.
I'm not exactly sure what we'll be doing, but we will see about that.
Wow. Like this segment is getting less and less useful.
It'll be something, and we will watch it or read it or something, and then we'll enjoy it or not. Words.
Wow.
Well,
I
really
cannot wait.
Carrying the spirit of the complete non sequitur weirdness of John Dies at the End to the very end.
Bye.